My name is Justin, and I am a son of God and an addict, and the host of the RICO 12 speaker meeting. And thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts, I am sober one day at a time since June 19th, 2015. And for that, I am beyond grateful. Welcome to RICO 12. We are an organization whose addictions include alcohol, drugs, lust, and sex, food, and gambling, just to name a few. We come together from all places, faiths, and backgrounds to learn the similarities of addiction and to gain tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. We invite recovering addicts with at least 1 year sobriety and who are actively working their recovery in their respective fellowships to share their experience, strength, and hope on a live Zoom webinar each Friday at noon Central Time for 20 to 25 minutes. Then we, the live audience, get the opportunity to ask questions of that speaker for another 20 to 25 minutes. If you are hearing this meeting in recorded podcast form and would like to participate as a live audience member in the future, please go to RICO12.com, that's RECO12.com, to learn more and submit your email address there to receive weekly invitations. And we send these invitations out to hundreds of people now each week. RICO 12 is a self-supporting service, and we appreciate your help in keeping us working our Step 12 in this manner. We gratefully accept contributions to help cover the cost of the Zoom platform, podcast platform, web hosting, and administrative costs. To contribute, you can go to RICO12.com/support, or you can click the link to PayPal that will be in the chat of the live meeting and also in the show notes of the podcast. When you contribute, please specify the meeting number. This is meeting number 66. One more word about our speakers before we introduce today's speaker. When we line up a speaker for a meeting, we ask them to seek guidance on what and how to present so that they can reflect the light they have been given. That light will inspire hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now, let's introduce our guest speaker for today, Ellen S., whose topic is hitting a second bottom and how surrender fits in with that. Now, here's the bio for Ellen. Ellen S. came across the Big Book Rooms nearly 5 years ago and treated the program as an alternative to therapy. She took from the program what she wanted and left the rest in the rooms. Because her life began to get better anyway, this worked for a time, until she had achieved every major goal herself from 5 years ago had set out to do, and her anxiety only grew stronger. This was her second bottom. It had to be thoroughly proven to her that she was an addict at heart. She has a body allergy to living life on life's terms. Wealth, relationship, career, all of it can be a log if she pursues them selfishly. All are a gift in God's will. The Big Book, page 334 states, an alcoholic cannot both control and enjoy his drinking. She could not both run her life and enjoy living it too. Even if her actions changed a little, her motivations had to align with God's constantly. If she doesn't live in surrender, she can't live at all. Ellen, the floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for bringing up this topic of surrender. Surrender, it really is at the core of the program that I practice. And surrender is also the thing that I found the most difficult. I like to say that I stumbled across these rooms. I actually came in shortly after beginning a relationship with a fellow who had been in recovery for a year. And after coming in, that's when I got familiarized with the Big Book Rooms of Recovery. That's when I first had the inkling that I might be an addict as well. I identify as a codependent, sex, love, and fantasy addict. And when I first came into these rooms, the only one that I was awake to was being a fantasy addict. I had spent years and years of my life living in a constant sleepwalk state where I lived inside my mind, effectively. I lived inside of the world that I wanted myself to be. I lived inside of fantastical ideas and being anywhere but where I actually was. And when I came across the program, I had already spent so many years being tired of living like that. And so when I came in, this seemed like the perfect solution. I went into the rooms. I found recovery, whatever that meant for me at the time. I got myself a sponsor. I began working the steps, but I never fully accepted the idea that I needed this program in every area of my life. I hung on to so much of my own self-control or perceived control over my life and those around me and my actions. And it was only when it came to the small, tiny little snippet, which is my fantasies, that I thought I needed God. And so the rest of it I carried with me. Um, I turned to a story in the big book called Empty on the Inside, which is on page 512. Here it says, I don't know where I learned the attitude that it wasn't all right not to know, but it was a certainty in my life and it almost killed me. The concept of set a goal, work for the goal, achieve the goal was foreign to me. You either had it or you didn't. And if you didn't have it, you couldn't let on. You might look bad. That was very much my attitude for so many years of my life, was that I had so much arrogance coming in. That was my pride. I was either arrogant or I was self-loathing. I was either the very best at something or I was the absolute worst. And I couldn't have it in between. It had to be one or the other. If someone complimented me, I didn't know how to say thank you for that because I either didn't believe you, didn't think that you meant it, or if I did believe you, I thought that, oh, that must mean I'm the greatest person in the world. It was a plane of living that was the furthest you could think of from neutrality, from being in a neutral state. But that was my reality coming in here, and had lived that like that for so long that I didn't know how to live differently. So when I began my recovery, when I first began to surrender even just a smidge of who I was to this program and to God, it gave me recovery. It gave me some relief because I had so much that was wrapped up in myself. But past the initial recovery, that was so clear to see, when I actually started to seek some relief from the fantasies and from, from the things that I would seek to escape my reality, I began to think that I didn't need it as much. And what that looks like is gradually the number of meetings that I would begin to go to would decrease. The amount of outreach that I would do would decrease. The amount of work that I would do with my sponsor would decrease. And how honest I was with my sponsor would decrease. At the end, where I found myself, nearly 4 years, just over 4 years in the program, was I was essentially completely isolated from my recovered self. And that little tiny smidge, still hanging on to convince myself that I was still sober, was maintaining weekly contact with my sponsor, where I would tell her very, very little about what was going on in my life. And finally, she heard so much of it in my voice that she just said, Ellen, you either have to do this fully or we can't continue to work together, because it doesn't sound like you want to be here. It doesn't sound like you want this recovery. And meanwhile, this entire time in these 4 years, my career began to grow and flourish. My education completed and began to flourish. My relationship began to flourish. I was at a point when I hit that rock, when I hit that wall, what I call my second bottom. Externally, I didn't have markers that were clear to say that my life was in shambles. That's what I had relied on for so many years. Because for me, I didn't really have any true confidence. I didn't have any confidence that came from within. I always looked outwards for confirmation of having done something right or being somebody. And because of that, I looked to what I had accomplished as the markers for whether or not I was still sober. And that's not the correct measurement to use. I thought that if my life on the outside looked fine, then my recovery must be fine too. If my relationship was continuing to grow, then how could I still be codependent? If my relationship was at a happy spot where we began to grow, we were engaged to be married, then how could I still be codependent? I thought that if my career continued, if I continue to achieve success, if I got the job that I wanted, the dream job that I wanted, the next dream job that I wanted, then how could I still be an addict? Because there's obviously an addict is someone who looks like an addict on the outside. But what I had in sobriety was so weak because I had taken it all back slowly in the course of those 4 to 5 years of being half in the program and half out, of never truly giving myself away to God. I found myself in a place where I had taken it all back without even realizing it, because that's how strong my ego is. My ego will convince me that every little piece, well, I don't need to give that to God either. Because if I didn't give that piece to God, then what do I need to give this piece to God? And slowly but surely, you come to a point where you wonder, do I need God in my life at all? And that was where I was when I hit that bottom. Because it became very clear to me that this is what they mean when they, in the program where you hear that you have to continue to grow and deepen your spiritual connection. This is what is meant by that, because there is no stagnation in our recovery. My addicted mind will continue to get worse and worse if I don't grow my connection to God. And I had thought that I could give just a portion of myself over and be okay. And slowly but surely I drifted until I came to a head where the choice was one or the other. At that point, I was really faced with the question of either God is everything or God is absolutely nothing. And those are the only two choices for me, because I had tried it. I had tried it my way. I tried it where I do what I think should be done or needs to be done in the program. I go to very few meetings. I maintain a sponsorship connection. I don't do any great step 12 work. I don't do any sponsorship. And I thought that that was enough for me until it became very clear that I could still continue to live a life that looked like it was working. But I knew that inside I was feeling so much emptiness and so much uncertainty. And that was the result of me trying to rely on self, because I have a spiritual malady. There's a hole inside my spirit. There is a hole inside my person that can't be filled with anything but God. And I try to use everything and anything, including trying to do this program without actually doing this program, to fill that hole. And I was still fighting it. That is ultimately what I was doing. Was I was still fighting the idea of ultimate surrender. In the book, it says that we cease fighting everyone, anyone, even alcohol. I didn't even realize I was still fighting. I didn't even realize that I was still trying to resist God in every area of my life, because as a prideful person coming in with so much ego, I didn't actually understand what humility meant. I thought humility was self-deprecation. I thought humility was understanding that I couldn't be good at everything, but I could be good at some things. But that's not the point of humility. Humility is understanding that we are all children of God, and that is my worth and value. If today I am understanding my role as a child of God, then I'm in the right place. And that's how I can love everyone around me and be content and accepting of what happens to me and how others around me behave, when I understand that we are all children of God and we all play our role. And then I don't need to resist so much everything that's happening in my life. I don't need to resist what I'm feeling. I don't need to resist what I'm doing, what you're doing. I don't need to resist the outcome of anything that goes on around me, because it's all in God's will. And my only role here is to play the role that God assigned to me, and to do my absolute best to just look for the right next step to ask. So there's a story book that I also want to turn to as well, where the line says, this is in The Man Who Mastered Fear, page 251 of the big book. It says, nothing had changed, and yet everything had changed. The scales had dropped from my eyes, and I could see life in its proper perspective. I had tried to be the center of my own little world, whereas God was the center of a vast universe, of which I was perhaps an essential but a very tiny part. That really embodies the way that I see the world today, and the difference between how I was and how I am in program. It's that fundamental understanding that I play a role and I play a part in God's great universe. And that it doesn't mean that I'm not worth anything. It doesn't mean that the things that I do aren't significant or meaningful or impactful on the people and the organizations around me. It just simply means that I play a part in God's great universe. And my little part, that's my job. That's my job for today. That's my role. That's all I'm here to do. And it doesn't mean that it gives me any meaning in my life. It doesn't mean that I am dependent on that role for worth and self-value. It just simply means that I'm here to do a job. God has given me a job. He is my employer. I'm here to do the job, and that is all. It's very simple. In this program, we say it's simple but not easy, and it is a very simple concept. I'm here to play the role that God assigned, and that's all I really have to do to be okay. So the last thing I wanted to kind of touch on, and I think I'm a little ahead of time, so just to turn it back to fantasy, and I know, Justin, you had wanted to raise it as well as a topic. On the topic of fantasy, and when I came in, this idea of being a fantasy addict. For anyone who's on the line who identifies, or who is listening to this podcast who identifies, fantasy for me can be any sort of avenue that you find. Perhaps you don't even have stimulation from outside, nothing but your own mind. But the idea that you can turn inwards to your mind and find escape and happiness and joy in your vision of what your life looks like. I am a fantasy addict because I rely on my own ideas of what's going on in my life and what I want my life to look like. And in that sense, I resisted surrender for so many years because I didn't understand what it meant to give myself over. I still had these ideas that would live in my head of what I wanted and desired. I still had these ideas of who I wanted myself to be, what I wanted to achieve, the person I wanted to be with, the people around me and how they saw me. I was very attached to these ideas, and I would fantasize about them because that was a way that I could find it the easiest. And so living in that state of being and still continuing to be in that state of being in many parts of my recovery, I never really wanted to give that over to God. I had so many ideas of how I can continue to do what I'm doing because, oh, it's not perfect, it's progress, not perfection. These ideas that would maintain my life as it is while still having some recovery. The mental gymnastics that I would do in order to convince myself that what I was doing was enough and that what I was doing in recovery was enough. My fantasies that would live on. The way that I handle it today is understanding that I can't really fight my mind. I can't fight when the fantasies try to come in, but it's a choice whether or not to take it and run away with it. I'm not responsible for this first thought that comes in, but I am responsible for the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth. And that first thought that comes in, that's an opportunity for surrender right there on the spot. That it comes in and I surrender to that state of being. I surrender to the fact that my mind works in this way. I surrender to the fact that I still have desires and thoughts that will come into my mind. And right there and then, I do a surrender prayer. I do a step 3 prayer. And I also just take a moment to have a little conversation with God, because God is my friend and God is walking with me. And I surrender to God because I trust God. I trust that even if this never goes away in my life, even if the first thought will continue to pop up, when I look back on the progress that I have made, that's all because of God. God has made that possible. And so I continue to trust God to continue to remove this from me. The surrender that I have is that continuous state of being, of understanding that God is with me and God is the center of my universe. And God is at the core of my recovery. And every opportunity, whether something good has happened or whether something bad has happened, whether my interaction with someone wasn't how I thought it was going to be, whether an outcome from work or any other part of my life isn't what I expected, or even if it's exactly what I expected, I take that opportunity to remember that God is with me and God is walking with me. And if it wasn't what I wanted, well, there's a lesson to be learned here. I surrender that to God. I surrender what I feel about the situation to God. And I ask just, what is my role here? What's the job that you have for me? And if it's something great, that I've had, then I thank God for that too. I feel grateful. And I still ask God, what is my role here? What's my job? What's the next thing that you want me to do? Because me having great things in my life doesn't mean that I'm a phenomenal person. It doesn't mean that I'm a spectacular person who deserves everything. It just means I've had something nice that happened in my life, and I'm grateful for that. And it's a gift. And it's an opportunity for me to then be very grateful and continue to do my role and appreciate the nice gifts that I've had in my life and keep going. So with that, I guess I'll turn it over to you, Justin, and see if there's any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ellen. You opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I loved the way you tied in a couple of things from the big book into your own story that I saw from a different angle this way, and I really appreciate that. A reminder to our live audience, if you have questions for Ellen, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. It looks like two speech bubbles over the top of each other. And before we get to those Q&A, Ellen, do you mind taking just about 60 seconds and sharing a little bit more about your fellowship that you attend and how it helps you in your day-to-day life?
Sorry, Justin, there is a little bit of a lag on my end. Yes, absolutely. So I belong to the Toronto group, the Spiritual Gangsters, as we like to call ourselves. We had Bianca R., who came on to speak last week. The Spiritual Gangsters are a collection of fellowships that follow the Big Book message. We are codependents, we're sex and love and fantasy addicts, we are narcotics addicts, we're food addicts, we're every kind of addict that you can think of. And it all ties into the same fellowship because at the end of the day, the Big Book has the message for all of us. It has the answer for all of us. And that's the solution that we go off of. So I hope that I can, I'm not sure if anyone in the chat is available information for that, but if not, Justin and I will follow up with more information to be posted. But we have a series of WhatsApp groups that we're in, and anyone who's interested can definitely reach out, and we're more than happy to add you to one of the WhatsApp groups so that we can all share the message.
I love it. That Spiritual Gangsters group seems to be on fire. I think, well, I know that that group, that fellowship, that group of people has been by far the most represented in the RICO 12 speaker meetings. It's awesome. We've had lots of your members on there. All right. So let me get to a couple of questions that I have for you and any other questions that come in from our live audience. So Ellen, I really want to, you spent some time on fantasy. I want to dig on one of the things that you shared there. You talked about how, as a fantasy addict, you lived in a fantasy world, projecting things out, saying, "Oh, I wish I had this. This is what my future is going to look like," et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How is that different than like goal setting? If I set goals and, I hear and see people with vision boards and all those types of things, is it different? Is it the same thing? Tell me a little bit about that.
That's a great question. I'm really happy you asked about that. I don't think it's the same thing, but I don't think it's so different either. I think the distinction, for me at least in my experience, is how attached am I to the outcome of that. Of course, I still set goals. Of course, I set many goals in my life, goals of where I want to be, goals of 5 years, 10 years. I'm the kind of person who's a very future planner. And it's I think that it's great to have goals for the future, but where my fantasies come in is that I'm very attached to not only the outcome of what's to happen, I'm attached to my own perception of myself. I'm attached to the vision of who I am and how I should feel. And more importantly, in those fantasies, how others should feel about me. My fantasy relates to my codependency, my sex and love addiction, because my fantasy is what is used to help satisfy those parts of my life when I feel deficiency. That's where it becomes a reliance, and that's where it becomes an addiction for me. My codependency, for instance, I'm very deeply dependent as a codependent person upon people, places, and things to make me feel good about myself. And if I don't have the right people, I'm in the right place, where I don't have all the things that I want in my life, I fantasize about that instead of having them. And that becomes a substitute for me. And I become very attached to how I feel should I have those things, and how others would feel about me should I have those things. And that's the fantasy addiction portion. And that's when it actually becomes entirely devoid of any goal setting. I'm not even interested in the goals that I'm setting for myself. I only focus on what I want and not on the work that I need to do in order to achieve some goal I have in the future. Often I find that a lot of my fantasies, it's not really about the goal of what I want my life to really be in 5 years, 10 years. It's really more about how I want to feel in that moment, how I want others to feel about me when I achieve that.
Thank you for digging there a little bit and helping clarify a few things for me. I really appreciate it. One of the things that you said also was about, the first thought. The first thought is always going to come. There's always going to be a first thought, but the first thought is not on me. The second, third, fourth, fifth, etc., are on me. Initially, when you recognized, I think I'm a fantasy addict here, when those first thoughts would come in, did you feel shame? Did you feel guilt? And did that make you feel like garbage? And has that changed over time? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that for all us addicts, right, the weird thing is that when I first came in, I actually would rather have been any sort of substance addict than to be a fantasy addict, because I thought, well, who gets addicted to fantasy? That is the weirdest thing that I've ever heard of, and it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But I think that often becomes, that's the part of our ego. That's my ego that's talking. My ego feels the most sensitive about that. And so I feel the most amount of shame when it comes to my own addiction, and when it comes to the thing that I find is the most difficult for me. It made me feel outcast and isolated, which I now understand is a part of my codependent anorexia. When I first came into the program, I didn't want to say it to anyone for the very longest time. In fact, when I first came into the program, I began by going into a lot of AA meetings. And I would just very simply introduce myself as an addict. I would try to avoid talking about myself. I went to open AA meetings. The partner that I was then dating and now married to was an alcoholic, a recovered alcoholic. And so I would often just go in there and copy from those rooms that had a lot of wisdom. My first sponsor in the room was a recovered alcoholic who was very open-minded and willing to work with me. But there was always a part of my mind that thought, well, I'm different. It's the terminal uniqueness. I suffered from terminal uniqueness, thinking that I'm so special that, well, I can't remove the substance from my mind as a behavior. So I must be different. I must be special. I must be the absolute worst kind of addict. Or maybe I'm not an addict at all. Maybe I just need therapy. Maybe I just need psychological help. Whatever it happens to be, it's either the arrogance or the self-loathing that comes in. I'm either the worst kind of addict that you could possibly have, because you can't remove the substance that I'm addicted to from my brain, or I am the absolute, I'm not an addict. I must not be an addict. It doesn't make any sense for me. It was one or the other. I oscillate back and forth between the two. I would work the program very, very hard. And when it's not perfect, I would think, well, maybe it's not working for me because I'm not a true addict. When in reality, it was working. It is working. I have to do it on God's time. God doesn't say, oh, well, God keeps you sober and great, have a nice life. It's not a snap of a finger and it's gone. It's a continuous progress of work. And I've learned to appreciate the beauty in that work in recovery. And that's all a part of surrender as well, is understanding that it's not my pace. It's not my determination to make, that my mind will feel more sober some days than others. But as long as I continue to turn that over to God, as long as I still understand that that first thought that comes in is not my responsibility, and that first thought it's not anyone's responsibility. The first thought is just the first thought. It just is. And all I have to do is keep turning it over to God. That's all. That's all I have to do. It's a very, very, very simple thing to do. Very difficult to do, but very simple to do.
Thank you for sharing that. One of the things that drives RICO 12 and what I'm doing here on this podcast is finding the similarities of addiction. So often when I go into a room, whatever that room is, AA or SA or whatever, a lot of times it's like, hey, don't bring outside issues into here. But and I can respect that totally. But the similarities, no matter what my addiction is, whether it's fantasy, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whatever it may be, the root cause seems to be the same. The more people I talk to, the process that we go through seems to be very similar for each of those things. Just some of them are a substance or a product, and some of them are a mental thing. Some of them are a physical action. And there's so many similarities with that, though. Do you have any additional thoughts on that, the similarities of addiction and how it helps to dig to the base of these things?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for pointing that out. It's the reason why when I first came into the program, I sought recovery from a room of substance addicts that I felt very close to. I felt like everything they said, I related to. Every life experience I could see myself in. Every thought that would come in, I could hear in my own mind. There is so much of that inner core that connects us all. And I think at the end of the day, very simply, that's our spiritual malady, that there is something that is missing within me. And there's no other way to put it than there is just a God-shaped hole. I feel empty, and that emptiness is what drives me to hop on log after log in order to find some relief. The emptiness drives me to want to fill it with people, places, and things. The emptiness drives me to want to pursue ideas and goals and achievements and people. I want anything and everything to take me away from the thing of emptiness. That emptiness is really at the core of what drives my addiction. And I've never felt true contentment in just simply being than when I'm with God. And that contentment is the heart of surrender. And that contentment wasn't something that I could achieve without hitting that second bottom, without having my ego really, really thoroughly yanked away. I'm not sure if I made this very clear in my recollection of the second bottom. I heard in a speaker tape once a very interesting analogy. Or a very, very interesting story. One of my favorite speakers, Bob D, shares about how in recovery he had two sponsees who came in. One sponsee had just come back from having a DUI in which he killed 4 people. And the other sponsee had just come in after missing his son's birthday. And the one that stayed sober was the second one, because his ego was thoroughly squashed. because he said that I would never let my drinking affect my children. And it did. And all he did was miss a birthday party, which compared to killing 4 people seems like it is the less severe of the two. But it's our own definitions of what we need to prove to our own egos in order to thoroughly understand that we can't handle life on life's terms, and we can't live on our own will and not seek God's help. So for me, in that second bottom and hitting that second bottom, it was my version of telling my ego, like, look, everything around me is what it should be, and yet I still don't feel connected to it at all. This isn't giving me the fulfillment that I thought I would achieve. I thought that the goals, and to your question earlier, right, about achieving goals, I thought the goals were what I needed in my life. I thought that I had aspirations and dreams and fantasies about how I would feel when I achieved those goals. And when I actually achieved it, I felt nothing like it, because it isn't the goals and it isn't the things and it isn't the people and it isn't the accomplishments. That's not what can make me feel not empty anymore. That feeling of emptiness that drives us to turn to drink, to fantasy, to sex and love and anything and everything, that emptiness there, that it is the spiritual malady at its core. And that's what connects all of us.
Thank you so much. We have a question that came in from Harvey from our live audience. Harvey asks, what kind of work do you do that keeps you in the being rather than falling back into the doing?
Ooh, the being versus the doing. I think I see surrender as a state of being, and the doing and the actions is part of what gets me there. But staying in the being instead of focusing on the doing. I think at the end of the day, for me, a lot of it comes down to maintaining that spiritual condition. And it really actually at its core, I would say, is maintaining that spiritual condition. When you feel present and in the being, instead of focusing what you have or what you don't have, it's a state of gratitude and a state of surrender. And in my experience, it's not achieved by overthinking or thinking at all, or even doing certain things. It's a collection of all that helps to maintain my spiritual condition. It is the 12 steps. It is the meditation. It is ensuring that I go to my morning meditation meetings and outreach calls and work with my sponsor and work with my sponsees and attend my multiple fellowship meetings and share when I can and listen when I can. And it is the constant striving to try and get deeper into my programming. That state of being and state of surrender, it comes most naturally to me when I've done the work and I remind myself of God control. And I hope I'm answering this question, but that state of being, I feel, comes to me most naturally when I approach the things I need to do in my life, trying to align it with God's will by always asking first before I do anything. God, is this a good idea? God, is this what you want me to do? God, what is the next right step? Always be willing to ask that question and understanding that, that little difference of always asking first before I do anything at all. It's willingness. That's practicing that surrender. It's practicing the willingness. And it's a reminder for me that I'm just here to play a role. And that whatever it is that I'm doing, whatever action I'm taking, it is, it's in pursuit. It's in pursuit of God's will and not my will. So yeah, I hope I answered that.
I loved your walk through that. I think there's some good stuff in there that will help many people, and it helped me understand things a little bit better too. Thank you very much, Ellen, for that. And I want to, and you shared several of these things here, but I want to ask you kind of what does your daily routine that strengthens your connection, your spiritual connection with God look like? What does that basically look like to you?
My daily routine. I find that for me, meditation is definitely a must. I think every step of my programming is very much a must, but all the 12 steps, they have sort of a daily application. And the beautiful thing about surrender is that surrender comes in not just in step 3, but in every one of the steps. And so it depends on how difficult my day is, to be honest. I'm definitely not I'm not perfect by any means, and it's very much progress based. But on a good day, when I remember my programming, it would begin with the morning meditation prayer, which I can hopefully share the information to. It's a really great way to start my day, to not only connect with God, but to connect with my fellows, because I've learned in my fellowship that staying in the middle of the herd is how I get things done. That I have to be in the middle of it at all times, and that if I'm isolated and alone, that's not going to get me anywhere. Someone pointed out to me in a speaker tape once that the we of Alcoholics Anonymous, or we of any other fellowship, that we, when you first come into the program, the we is you and God and the person who reached out to you. And as you continue to be in that fellowship, the we grows bigger. The we becomes you and God and your fellows and the fellowship and everyone and anyone who understands your recovery journey, and anyone and everyone who you can help in your recovery journey. That we grows bigger, and that we is a very important part of the recovery. And so I have to stay close to my fellowship. I can't do this alone. I rely on the people in my fellowship who have better recovery than me, and they act as both my inspiration and my rock. And I rely on the fellows that I can help. That 12th step of service, that really, really, really is the key that locks it all together. And there's a reason why there's a whole chapter on it in the big book. Any opportunity that I have to do service is a very important one for me. So throughout my day, as I continue on, if I have difficulties that arise, the first thing I do is try to pause. That I have to rest in pause land. If I react, that usually doesn't come from God. If I feel rash, if I feel like I must do something right now or the moment will pass, if I feel like I urgently need to say something to someone, that usually doesn't come from a place of God. That rashness, the doing before the thinking, before getting a chance to reflect, that I find in my experience usually comes from a place of ego-driven self. And so taking a moment to pause and to think and to remember God and bring God into the present moment with me before I do something that, especially if it's rashly driven, especially if it's riding off of a very strong emotion, that I find is another way of helping me to bring surrender into. If I find that the day is particularly difficult, if I find that there are a lot of trying tests that I'm going through, then taking a moment to pray. And the prayer doesn't have to be in a quiet place. It depends on your circumstances. Sometimes I find myself outside. Sometimes I find myself in the middle of a business call. Whatever it happens to be, the prayer can just simply be, God, can you walk through this with me? God, can you be here with me? Can you be here with me in this moment and help me to do the next right thing? It's always bringing it back to that asking. Always be willing to ask for help. Coming into the program, I always had this idea of like, I must know, and I did not understand what uncertainty meant. I thought that uncertain means that you have no idea what you're doing. And for me in recovery, being in a place of I don't know is truly a great gift. It's a great gift to remind myself that I am perfectly human and that I seek the guidance of God And so throughout my day, if something happens, I always take the moment to ask. And if I don't know the answer to something, I'm okay with that too. I'm okay with sitting in the silence and sitting in the I don't know until something comes to me. And then wrapping up the day, going to bed. As a fantasy addict, the pre-bedtime is really ripe for dreaming about what I want to do and thinking about what I want for the next day. And that's also a moment for me to bring God into my presence. It's often heading to bed. If I've done my step 7 prayer and done my readings and everything, it's a great moment then to just have a conversation with God. And that's God has to be in every moment of my day. And God has become my best friend coming into this program. And it's something that I don't think I would have ever allowed myself to speak those words before coming into this program and before hitting my second bottom. But to understand that, we rely on this higher power, which has done great things for us. And God has done great, great, great things for me. God has given me the kind of peace that I never thought I would achieve in any other circumstances. And so why wouldn't I invite God into every part of my day? Why wouldn't I just take moments to invite him in to the moments where I feel is most difficult? And I take that moment to reflect at the end of my day, to reflect on what I'm feeling and where I am in my programming. And I take a moment to pray and meditate and also to ask God, what can I improve on next? How can I deepen my connection? Where is the missing piece? If there's something that's egging at me, is there an inventory that I haven't done? If there is, something that keeps coming up, an emotion that keeps coming up, or if I just feel disconnected with my fellowship, is there outreach I haven't done? Do I need to call my sponsee in the morning? Do I need to call my sponsor in the morning? Do I need to go to more meetings? Those are all really great questions that come also in the moment of silence and also after I've taken the time to reach out to God and to seek that contact consistently and constantly. And it's only after, I find in my experience at least, it's only after continuously asking and making that a habit that it becomes easier and easier. Like paving tracks by walking through a field of grass. And over time, the grooves from your footprints form the path and it becomes a practice path. And if you don't walk it carefully, if you don't walk it constantly, the grass will grow back and the path won't be there anymore. And so I try to take care to walk that path often.
I love that imagery of the path in the grass. Thank you for sharing that. And before we close up, Ellen, do you have any final words of wisdom that you'd like to share with us? Any invitations you may have for us, the listening audience?
I would just say to stay close to your fellowship and to always learn from those before you. Experience from others is the greatest wisdom that we could ever be given. And that's the beauty of this fellowship. And what I love about this fellowship is that we don't give advice to each other. We just give our experiences. We just give what has worked for us. And miraculously, it continues to work for more of us.
Beautiful. Oh, thank you so much, Ellen. That was a great RICO 12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If we didn't get to your question, or if you have other questions, please go to rico12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that will come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. If you've not yet gone to rico12.com and submitted your email address to get on that invitation list, do so. And you can join us live each Friday at noon Central Time. Next week, we'll be hearing from Ariel O.N., a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, sober over 7 years, whose speech will be titled "Staying in the Middle of AA." And I think that was kind of referenced by Ellen here earlier when she talked about staying in the middle of the herd. I think it's going to be a solid follow-up and a solid speech. All right, now let's launch off into the rest of our day with the third step prayer that Ellen will be saying for us.
Absolutely. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Amen.
Awesome. Amen. Thank you so much, Ellen. Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it, so work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and binded with the seal